Book 3, Part 4 of the Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrew Coleman. The Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1. Translated by Alfred John Church and William Jackson Brodribb. Book 3, AD 20-22, Part 4. Tiberius, having gained credit for forbearance by the check he had given to the growing terror of the informers, wrote a letter to the Senate requesting the tribunician power for Drusus. This was a phrase which Augustus devised as a designation of supremacy, so that without assuming the name of king or dictator, he might have some title to mark his elevation above all other authority. He then chose Marcus Agrippa to be his associate in this power, and on Agrippa's death, Tiberius Nero, that there might be no uncertainty as to the succession. In this manner he thought to check the perverse ambition of others, while he had confidence in Nero's moderation and in his own greatness. Following this precedent, Tiberius now placed Drusus next to the throne, though while Germanicus was alive, he had maintained an impartial attitude towards the two princes. However, in the beginning of his letter he implored heaven to prosper his plans on behalf of the state, and then added a few remarks, without falsehood or exaggeration, on the character of the young prince. He had, he reminded them, a wife and 3 children, and his age was the same as that at which he had himself been formally summoned by the divine Augustus to undertake this duty. Nor was it a precipitate step. It was only after an experience of 8 years, after having quelled mutinies and settled wars, after a triumph and 2 consulships, that he was adopted as a partner in trials already familiar to him. The senators had anticipated this message, and hence their flattery was the more elaborate. But they could devise nothing but voting statues of the 2 princes, shrines to certain deities, temples, arches, and the usual routine, except that Marcus Silanus sought to honour the princes by a slur on the consulate, and proposed that on all monuments, public or private, should be inscribed, to mark the date, the names not of the consuls, but of those who were holding the tribunician power. Quintus Haterius, when he brought forward a motion that the decrees passed that day should be set up in the Senate house in letters of gold, was laughed at as an old dotard who would get nothing but infamy out of such utterly loathsome sycophancy. Meantime, Junius Blisus received an extension of his government of Africa, and Servius Malogenensis, the priest of Jupiter, demanded to have Asia allotted to him. It was, he asserted, a popular error that it was not lawful for the priests of Jupiter to leave Italy. In fact, his own legal position differed not from that of the priests of Mars and of Quirinus. If these latter had provinces allotted to them, why was it forbidden to the priests of Jupiter? There were no resolutions of the people, or anything to be found in the books of ceremonies on the subject. Pontiffs had often performed the rites to Jupiter when his priest was hindered by illness or by public duty. For 75 years after the suicide of Cornelius Merula, no successor to his office had been appointed, yet religious rites had not ceased. If during so many years it was possible for there to be no appointment, without any prejudice to religion, with what comparative ease might he be absent for 1 year's proconsulate? That these priests in former days were prohibited by the pontiff from going into the provinces, was the result of private feuds. Now, thank heaven, the supreme pontiff was also the supreme man, and was influenced by no rivalry, hatred, or personal feeling. As the augur Lentulus and others argued on various grounds against this view, the result was that they awaited the decision of the supreme pontiff. Tiberius deferred any investigation into the priest's legal position, but he modified the ceremonies which had been decreed in honour of Drusus's tribunician power, with special censure on the extravagance of the proposed inscription in gold, so contrary to national usage. Letters also from Drusus were read, which, though studiously modest in expression, were taken to be extremely supercilious. "We have fallen so low," people said, "that even a mere youth, who has received so high an honour, does not go as a worshipper to the city's gods, does not enter the senate, does not so much as take the auspices on his country's soil. There is a war, forsooth, or he is kept from us in some remote part of the world. Why, at this very moment he is on a tour amid the shores and lakes of Campania. Such is the training of the future ruler of mankind, such the lesson he first learns from his father's counsels. An aged emperor may indeed shrink from the citizen's gaze, and plead the weariness of declining years and the toils of the past. But as for Drusus, what can be his hindrance but pride?" Tiberius, meantime, while securing to himself the substance of imperial power, allowed the Senate some shadow of its old constitution, by referring to its investigation certain demands of the provinces. In the Greek cities, license and impunity in establishing sanctuaries were on the increase. Temples were thronged with the vilest of the slaves. The same refuge screened the debtor against his creditor, as well as men suspected of capital offences. No authority was strong enough to check the turbulence of a people which protected the crimes of men as much as the worship of the gods. It was accordingly decided that the different states were to send their charters and envoys to Rome. Some voluntarily relinquished privileges which they had groundlessly usurped. Many trusted to old superstitions, or to their services to the Roman people. It was a grand spectacle on that day, when the Senate examined grants made by our ancestors, treaties with allies, even decrees of kings who had flourished before Rome's ascendancy, and the forms of worship of the very deities, with full liberty, as in former days, to ratify or to alter. First of all came the people of Ephesus. They declared that Diana and Apollo were not born at Delos, as was the vulgar belief. They had in their own country a river Centrius, a grove Ortygia, where Latona, as she leaned in the pangs of labour on an olive still standing, gave birth to those two deities, whereupon the grove at the divine intimation was consecrated. There Apollo himself, after the slaughter of the Cyclops, shunned the wrath of Jupiter. There too Father Bacchus, when victorious in war, pardoned the suppliant Amazons who had gathered round the shrine. Subsequently, by the permission of Hercules, when he was subduing Lydia, the grandeur of the temple's ceremonial was augmented, and during the Persian rule its privileges were not curtailed. They had afterwards been maintained by the Macedonians, then by ourselves. Next, the people of Magnesia relied on arrangements made by Lucius Scipio and Lucius Sulla. These generals, after respectively defeating Antiochus and Mithridates, honoured the fidelity and courage of the Magnesians by allowing the temple of Diana of the White Brow to be an inviolable sanctuary. Then the people of Aphrodisia produced a decree of the dictator Caesar for their old services to his party; and those of Stratonicia, one lately passed by the divine Augustus, in which they were commended for having